I want to start this video a little different than past weeks because the message is so important in this week's video that I wanted to get out to as many people as possible. To help spread awareness, I'm asking that you please go ahead and hit the like button right now so that YouTube's algorithm is more likely to show the video to others. And if you enjoyed the video, please share it with those in your network so they can learn about the devastating impact that COVID-19 has had on human trafficking. Now, as COVID-19 rages around the planet, everything from national economies down to the individual person has been affected in unprecedented ways. I first covered the effects this coronavirus was having on current victims and how it was putting more people at risk of becoming human trafficking victims almost 2 months ago. And I followed up with another video on how field workers were considered essential workers while many were actually labor trafficking victims. If you've not seen the first two videos, I highly recommend stopping this video and watching those first. This week's video digs in deeper to how COVID-19 is not stopping human trafficking and how the human traffickers are adapting to deal with the pandemic while the police and other would-be rescuers are being slowed down by the virus. According to a network of nonprofits known as the Global Protection Cluster, international lockdowns mean an estimated 75% of humanitarian operations are temporarily on pause. And at the same time, these funding cuts are exacerbating the conditions that anti trafficking actors have been working against to help keep people from being vulnerable. An advisor from Europe's Office of Democratic Institution and Human Rights puts it like this: I'm already hearing that victims are being forced to participate in even riskier activities to earn money for traffickers, that they're facing higher levels of violence, and also that they're in more debt to the traffickers every day. So, if you're at home and thinking this is only happening because no one ever thought about how a pandemic would or could affect human trafficking victims, you would be wrong. Because Catherine Worsnup, an assistant professor at the University of Maryland, has been researching the effects of outbreaks and infectious diseases on human trafficking since 2017. Her findings show during these times there is an increase in economic inequality, stigma, separation from family, and the death of family members. All of these are well established risk factors for trafficking. And by 2019, she had proved her hypothesis that countries that had experienced outbreaks were likely to see an increase in trafficking after the spread of infection. This increase in trafficking seems to be due to the frantic conditions where people are struggling to access resources. This makes it much harder to persuade the nonprofits to make space to combat trafficking as they focus on helping people attain life saving resources, even though human trafficking can also be a matter of life or death. And more than nonprofits not being able to help victims and the vulnerable during these pandemics, it is the determination of traffickers to profit off of others' pain that increases victimization rates. A perfect example of this is how the FBI recently found that coronavirus is now working its way into advertisements for women being sold for sex. In New York, the FBI's Child Exploitation and Human Trafficking Task Force is currently working on a number of cases in which victims trafficked for sex were advertised as being virus free or willing to wear a mask and gloves. Now, let that sink in just for a minute. They are so determined to profit off of these victims that not even a pandemic that has crushed economies around the world will stop them. This determination to profit from others' pain has nonprofit leaders like Beverly Weeks, the executive director of Cry Freedom Missions, unable to help everyone, as she has seen a dramatic increase in the number of victims since the beginning of COVID-19. Others in the nonprofit world are sounding the alarm about victims coming from places we may never have thought about, as all over the country inmates are being released from prisons and jails to prevent outbreaks on the inside. At the same time, according to Tracy Klein, the director at True Justice International, among those being released are trafficking survivors. She stated her concerns like this: some of those girls are going to end up back in exploitation situations or back on drugs because they don't have the resources. At the same time, the resources that are available are hard to access, as she further explained that housing is very difficult because bringing in new clients is much more difficult when you have to take into consideration their health and with shelter in place order. Since the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, groups around the country are running low on space for victims. In Jacksonville, Florida, one woman's predicament captures the stark reality that many are facing due to the pandemic. She said to a local news agency, I have to live in a hotel that costs $68 a day, and I have nowhere else to go. I have to eat, I have to drink, and I must have shelter. Sadly, her situation isn't unique, As I previously mentioned, advocates for sex trafficking victims contend that there is a growing demand for the sex trade despite the risk posed by the coronavirus. And make no mistake about it, traffickers are aware of the vulnerabilities and lack of resources of those who are already suffering. And what I would argue is the most unbelievable part of human trafficking. There are those who will sell their own children into sex trafficking. While some may believe this would only take place in a deeply impoverished nation halfway across the planet, this is taking place in the US right now, and the coronavirus may be increasing the rate at which some parents are willing to sell their children. In Blair County, Pennsylvania, officials said some kids are being bought and sold from their own homes. And the director of the Blair County Child Advocacy Center, Ashley Owens, said, "We were able to identify quite a few different cases of child trafficking." Across the country, RAIN, the nation's largest anti-sexual violence organization, found that 2/3 of identified youth who expressed concerns related to the pandemic were trafficked by family members, and many lived with the family member through the quarantine. That leaves these kids literally trapped between a life-threatening virus and their trafficker. It is absolutely heartbreaking situation that too many youths are having to deal with. And out on the streets, youth are still at an increased risk due to COVID-19, as the group Traffic 911 has reported that the kids they are finding out on the streets are being forced to do live interactive web-based videos. This keeps the Johns from having to risk being exposed to the virus while still being able to victimize a youth from the comfort of their own couch. Similarly, RAIN started closely monitoring data from the National Sexual Assault Hotline to better understand concerns related to COVID-19. The first thing they noticed was that since March 1st, for the first time ever, minors have accounted for a majority of victims using the hotline. Additionally, they found that the coronavirus has dramatically heightened minors' fears for their safety. And even in a safe home, kids are still at risk. As kids are not going to school or out to play, they are spending more time online. And sex predators are taking advantage of this situation, and more children are likely to be groomed online and become victims of sexual extortion. Now, there's so much more that is happening concerning human trafficking during this pandemic that I don't have time to cover in this video. From street level forced prostitution being moved into apartment buildings and traffickers being more likely to carry weapons since the outbreak began, to money appropriated for victims being diverted to COVID-19 responses. It is absolutely crazy to see how this pandemic has made suffering worse and more widespread. So while I was not able to cover every way that the coronavirus has affected human trafficking, I hope that I was able to show how individual vulnerabilities have increased and placed people in situations where traffickers can take advantage of them, while at the same time displaying the ruthless and unrelenting desire of the traffickers to profit regardless of the pandemic or not. I understand this crisis is at a level that is almost unprecedented. But as we respond to this pandemic, I hope we can find a way to focus more resources on these individuals who are more than just isolating or surviving. They are suffering, and it'll take a collective effort at the global, national, state, and individual level to find them and free them. One way you can help is by sharing these videos with others, so they know that this is taking place. In the future, I will be offering more details about practical ways that you and those in your network can help human trafficking victims, even during the quarantine. Thank you for listening to Human Trafficking Hater. If you're interested in getting more content about human trafficking, how to address it, and how it impacts millions around the world, please subscribe and join us as we continue to hate human trafficking and raise awareness.